Welcome to another episode of Teachers for Teachers. I'm Dr. Leah Haynes. I'm usually here with Dr. Dejana Figueroa. She's not able to make it yet, but may jump in partway through. But I do have two fabulous people to bring to your attention. One is our guest today, Daniel Hutterer, who is a fifth grade math teacher right now. He is a graduate of Antioch University, which is my alma mater as well. So I look forward to having a conversation with him about all things education at this point. And Dr. Marcella Klein-Williams is with us, and she is a regular on the panel. Say hi, Marcella.
Hi, everybody. It's good to be here today.
Hello.
Yeah, so happy.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Of course, really happy to have you here. It was actually Dr. McDermott, Dr. Cynthia McDermott, who suggested that we talk to you. So you came highly recommended, and I actually do remember having you in class at Antioch when I was teaching, and I am thrilled to have you here. So let's start, Daniel, with what motivated you to go from engineering, and you were teaching martial arts, I believe, before teaching. What motivated you to consider full-time teaching?
I've always loved teaching. I started teaching martial arts when I was obviously very involved with martial arts. I actually got my black belt when I was only 13 and even started teaching in my own classes at that same time. My mother actually started a second career as teaching later in life, and that always inspired me. I loved watching her get into it, and I loved watching her teach. And as I got older, it's something that I've always loved, teaching people, helping people, and I've always been complimented on it. And as I got older, I was studying engineering, and as much as I loved it, my engineering professors were awful. They were very, very smart people, but could not communicate what was in their head, what they were trying to share. And I ended up helping people even with tough concepts that I had trouble with, and ended up just falling in love with it. And my school had a special science teaching when I was at the University of Arizona, so I started getting involved and just really fell in love with teaching. I even took a year off to volunteer with the AmeriCorps, National Civilian Community Corps, so I can come back to California and start taking classes in California to get my teaching credential here.
You know, one of the things you said—
It's always been a passion.
You triggered a memory for me of a coworker a few years ago who was an engineer, and he was at Berkeley in the 60s. So he was talking about how he and a couple of other engineering classmates were walking through the quad one day, and there was all this commotion going on. They didn't know what was going on. So they were so out of touch with what was happening on the campus. They didn't know anything about the riots or any of the issues around the Vietnam War. And I realized, like, that translates into, you know, not particularly great teaching methods as well, from what you were saying. So Marcella,
Absolutely.
right? Marcella, you've worked with a lot of different groups. Has that been anything that you've witnessed with the engineering teaching at the college level?
You know, we're really fortunate at Oxnard College. We just started an engineering program. It was on the books fall of 2019, so we're into it a year and a little bit. And we just have some of the most inspiring and best faculty at the college. So like Daniel Hutterer, we're really inspired to become educators. I think that's part of the promise of California community colleges, is oftentimes they're really inspired first to teach. That's why they're there, is because they really get a kick out of kind of helping students along that path to a career. And, you know, one of the things, Daniel, I'll share with you at Oxnard Community College is a lot of the students who are attending come from low-income backgrounds, and many of them are first in their family. And we have, I believe, over 30 that are actually at universities now for engineering, just specifically engineering, some of the top universities that our nation has. And when they're graduating, one of the calls that I get is they don't understand the pay. It's way more, the numbers are not the same. So I remember I was talking to one young man who at 23 is graduating from Berkeley, has just taken a new job, and it's not that he's making more than his parents. It's that he could put together his family, and he's making more than all of them combined. So one of the things that's in the back of my head now is it's not only that they're first in their family to graduate from university, but it's the first in their family that have a 401k or get to think about retirement and what that looks like and how are you of support. But I get to report to you that at Oxnard College, our faculty that are supporting future engineers are really just fantastic. I used to tease Professor Justin Miller. I would go into his classes and sit at the back of the room just when I needed to see that sacred space of educator and learner and just listen in. Daniel, I'm ashamed to say, but it's just the darn truth. This STEM administrator, I can't keep up with all of the math that's happening, but I love being a part of that community.
Thank you so much for saying that, Marcella. And I think you're right there with it. And I think when I went to school originally to study for engineering, we did not know, I think, as much about engineers as a whole. Even years ago, it's a field that, and I'm sure you experience it well. One thing I experience as a teacher is a lot of times when I bring up math, I have parents that go, "Oh, I'm just not good at that," right? So not good at that. And immediately their child picks it up and wants to do that. And for a long time, I believe, especially guidance counselors and people that were sending you on to college didn't really understand what engineering was. If you were good at math and science, they just kind of sent you there. And there was an old engineering joke that they told us the very first day of any engineering class I had. And it's not a joke at all. They say, look to your left, look to your right. If you graduate, they won't be there. And it's like, first of all, as a teacher, what did you just do to all of your students? You just took this wind right out of their sail. You just destroyed their spirit. But it was not because it was necessarily the toughest program, but people didn't know what they were there for. If you're good at math and science, they sent you in that direction. And I think now we've realized engineering is such a big world. It opens up the world to so many possibilities. And we don't realize there's engineers for everything, from designing cars, the next food you're going to eat, the packages of your favorite candy bar, your water slides, everything.
Well, the chemical engineers are the heroes of today.
Right?
Isn't that crazy to think? Forget the chemical engineers. How about just the systems engineers that are figuring out how to get the vaccine into people's arms?
Right.
Here, we have the vaccine. How do we get them? What's the supply chain? All of those pieces. So those are really important components.
Absolutely. And we know now more and more programming is becoming the number one job skill requirement. Yeah. So that's amazing. And I think we've pushed the society more to understanding what engineers actually do and just how useful they are.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember, I always, as a matter of fact, we're celebrating Engineers Week. That is this week. And I'm a host for Naval Base Ventura County, has some of the top-notch leaders. And we're hosting an evening of storytellers with these leaders who are engineers. I always, even today, whenever I'm doing the introductions, I always talk about, and we're going to be talking with engineers. And in the simplest terms, engineers are people who design human solutions to everyday problems, and even the once-in-a-generation problems that today are happening every day. But I always kind of frame it because there's a lot of folks that don't know what is it that an engineer does. They don't know what that looks like.
Well, there aren't that many trains these days, so we don't need as many engineers as we used to. I've heard that one a couple of times.
Oh, yeah.
What about distance learning for you, Daniel? How's that been for the class?
Distance learning is a very unusual situation. Just to start off at that point, it's unlike anything else we've ever done before. So as a teacher, you're trying to teach content in a way that's never been done. So it's very unusual. And teaching online classes, and I'm a professor at Antioch University, adjunct professor, and even teaching classes at the college level, on the computer before this was a little bit different. Everyone is still unusual for people. Now it's the new kind of normal. And so it's trying to adjust to it is very unusual. I teach fifth grade this year, which is wonderful. I love my class. And they're thankfully old enough that they use a lot of their own devices. They're getting used to them more and more. But especially with a lot of the younger students, first of all, getting them just used to their devices in a new way. A lot of times technology when you're younger is kind of treated as a toy. Now it's trying to get them to understand it really as that tool, right? It's that tool to accomplish your work. And so you have to approach it from a completely different way. And I think that's a challenge for a lot of teachers this year, but also an opportunity to think about how you're presenting your information to your students. One thing is when you're in a classroom, there's everything up on the boards. We have our anchor charts. We have all this. Now you have this little screen. So your information, right, that you got to share with your kids has to fit on that screen. So now it's really trying to also break up what we're trying to know into clear, concise pieces so we can still teach our kids and still scaffold our learning. So they're still getting that aha moment, still getting that wonderful learning moment, but over Zoom, unfortunately.
Are you?
So you have to find what works.
Yeah, are you finding them like willing to be on camera? Like, will they keep their cameras on? Do you insist on it? How do you handle that?
Our district absolutely insists on it, and does become a safety issue to make sure that we can see the kids and monitor, make sure everything's going okay. But unfortunately, there are all issues just with technology. If they're in a spot one day, no internet signal is not standard, doesn't stay constant, it changes throughout the day. So especially sometimes, you know what, their camera's on, but they couldn't hear me because of the signal. So is it worth to shut off the camera so they can understand me? Absolutely. So you kind of have to play a couple of those games occasionally, but for the most part, students are nice for it, they're open for it, and especially for a lot of them, that's some of the best social emotional experience they're getting right now, because being at home with your family is wonderful, but you want to be able to see friends. We need that interaction, and so at least this way they can still see each other and interact that way.
Yeah, and I wonder, like, I don't think it's wonderful for all of them, right? I mean, there are, if it's a healthy family situation, and you're in Santa Monica, Malibu District, I'm guessing you have some, pretty, more affluent than some of the other neighborhoods. But I wonder for the kids who are not in a comfortable home environment, is there any, can you identify that? Can you deal with it remotely?
Absolutely. I have a couple students that are not in a best economic position right now with families. Some families have moved in with other families to take care and very limited. Some families where you have a lot of students in a very small area. So anytime you try to ask a student, you're hearing several other people around. Some families, you hear the TV is on because somebody else is home. I had a student at the beginning of the year that would not show themselves because of the family situation. And that is an unfortunate part that you deal with, but it's still the same time, they're still a student. They still want to learn. They still want to feel that connection. So we want to try to use every effort, make every effort we can to still connect them, check in how you're doing. You may not be able to visually say, but you can still tell me in chat. I'll read it out loud. I'll say it to the class, make sure that their voice is still being heard. The last thing we want ever is for any student not to feel like their voice matters. We want to make sure everyone counts and everyone is involved and still participating in class.
So I think of Tim Griffin, who's often with us for this, was teaching fifth grade math, and he was telling me over lunch one day about the fact that when on Fridays he felt like the kids were all off thinking about what they're going to do over the weekend, and he lost Friday afternoons, and then Monday morning was they'd forgotten everything from last week, so you've got to do a review before you can start into the new material. And he came up with an idea that he calls masterpiece theater. And he turned Friday afternoon into an opportunity for the kids to create a play, put them in groups of 3 or 4. They had to create a little skit that incorporated the math that they had been studying that week. And that gave him Friday afternoon to do planning for next week. But he then also gained Monday morning back because they didn't forget what they had put into their play. And so I'm telling that story in part because I just love how that worked for him in his classroom. but also then to ask if you have any little tricks, because that one clearly you need to be, well, I guess you could have them do it, put them in little breakout rooms and they could do it together virtually, but for him it was in the classroom. So I wonder if you've come up with any little hacks to work with the kids, keep them engaged. Like what's your trick there?
Absolutely. You can still do a lot of things you do in the classroom. We still do some math games. There are some that we've done, and even that you need counters and dice for. So I'll create a Google Slides presentation where you have links for dice, have the counters, you can still move around, so you're still getting that kinesthetic action, and playing some of our math games, which the students love playing with. They keep asking for it more and more. We still do things like Kahoots, which I love. Students absolutely ask for all the time. A lot of times Fridays we'll do a couple of math Kahoots for a couple 15, 20 minutes to kind of see what they learned that week. It's a good way for us teachers to kind of do a quick assessment, but also they love it. They want to see who gets first,
Right.
who gets that top on Kahoot.
How about for you?
Yeah, I'm
go ahead.
curious. This is one of the things I was thinking about is that, we have our celebrities that we see on TV, right, on a screen. And we think, oh my goodness, it'd be great to see them in real life, to see a live performance. And I think like today I had to go back to the campus and I saw one of my colleagues there, and I see her on the screen all the time, but I was so excited get to see you in person. And I wonder how much of that will be, as hopefully as things are going, that we'll be able to be back, just the joy of being able to be in person, and kind of how that feels to be in community in a way that's not just, welcome to my home, would you like to have dinner at my table? Everybody's been living in my kitchen with me for the past year.
That has been one of the sort of benefits I've found of being in everyone's home. We get to meet each other's families and pets, and you see kids popping in and out of the screen. So it sort of normalizes most of us, like gives a fuller picture of who someone is, which I guess is also the scary part for what you were mentioning earlier, Daniel, about some of the kids who don't really want anybody to be able to see what's going on behind them in their family, which is kind of tough. What about for you, Daniel, as an instructor? How has this year been for you?
It's definitely been a whirlwind year. It's been interesting. A lot of extra hours, a lot of extra planning. When you're in the classroom, I can, make photocopies. We can do things. We can kind of adjust on the fly. On the computer, it's a little bit tougher. And one of the key things is also getting that constant feedback from students. In the classroom, you're constantly looking over their shoulder. You're constantly looking at it. So one thing I actually brought to Will Rogers this year, I've gotten some other teachers to use, is an application called Pear Deck. So when you run your Google Slides, the students are actually live. They see your slideshow live with you. So that way, if there's ever an issue sharing my screen over Zoom, they always have it. And you ask questions right there in the middle of the slides, and you get that data, real-time feedback right away. So even certain questions I ask them, and I take a look, make sure everyone's responding. What are you saying? Whether it's a text, multiple choice, but getting that feedback right away from the students has really been huge this year. And it's been a way for me to be able to get that formative feedback and adjust to a lesson and adjust on the fly. Some of my students have had a little bit tougher time, of course, with technology, but really you need to take it slow, take the deep breath and go, okay, it's not working right now. Let's problem solve, right, together. Let's use that executive functioning, right, and let's try it another way. What works? And so in that regard, actually, I think a lot of students have actually developed their executive functioning a lot this year, probably out of necessity for it, but I'm sure it's going to serve them really well in the future, having developed it.
What's one thing that in 10 years, what's a story that you'll tell?
That'll be an interesting one. I think some of the stories I would say is really getting students to collaborate even over Zoom has been really interesting, especially as my students have a couple very talented writers which are really wonderful this year. And as we've looked and we've done a lot of research projects, especially since we have at home and the internet, everything you can look at, One has been great is actually having someone collaborate with digital work. Since they're already used to digital work, it's actually been really nice and more useful for them to collaborate on writing with even with Google Docs, with comments. And I had a very talented group of 3 students who actually each wrote a couple pages about our exploration unit and combined it into one kind of short book. And so it really is amazing that just how they've been able to collaborate even over Zoom and the distance with technology.
That's
Yeah,
wonderful.
that's amazing.
Yeah.
I remember early on we were talking about the theory of gravity. So Isaac Newton is that he was actually away because of the plague. That's why he was out of London, and that's when he had come up with it. Is that and I can understand the desire to crawl inside your brain for creativity and kind of escape the nonsense. I think all of us have had that in one form or another this past year of how to escape kind of the harder parts of this year.
Absolutely, and especially with teaching young students, we take our first half an hour every day as social emotional learning, because you do have to take time. You do have to talk about your mental resilience, your emotional resilience, and just be able to take some time to relax, talk with people. We always check in each day, just be able to connect with people, because sometimes, like you said, especially right now, it's very easy to kind of crawl inside your head a little bit, and we want to make sure the students are expressing themselves and still feel they can freely share with us.
It has been interesting in this past year is that in a typical day it would have been dozens of people I would have had these micro interactions with, walking in to get my coffee in the morning, the people behind the counter, the people that were regulars that I knew. And that's within the first hour of the day. I go for a walk, I see my regulars, I go to coffee, I see my regulars, and I go to work and I see, scores and scores of people. Now you two are like the highlight of my day. It's like, whoa, I get to see people. Other than that, I got the dog, my husband, my son, and we're done.
That's so true. I wonder, and I want to hear from both of you. Let's start with Daniel about what parts of this would you like to carry forward?
Coming from somebody from an educational background and technology background, I would love for for everyone kind of keep the technology understanding as we move forward. I've been helped a lot of people over the years with certain technology issues. I would love to see our understanding acceptance of it expand as a tool, not just as a toy sometimes.
Well said. How about you, Marcella?
No, I think there's a couple of things. One, Daniel, I completely agree with you of, some of the things that were made possible with technology. Those will, regardless of how we feel about it individually, those are just a must that they need to move forward. I think there is something to be said for, as much as I miss all of the interaction, the forced slowdown and making small of life. There are some treasures that have been a part of that have been really kind of useful in not going far afield. The being forced not to be able to plan. This is a year where I normally would have had a huge vacation planned for August. My husband and I are celebrating a milestone anniversary, and so now we just have to be more creative about it. How about you, Dr. Haynes? What are the things that you take forward?
I think at the end of this, the extroverts are going to be really excited about getting back out there, and the introverts are going to be like a little more intimidated by the process. I fall into that second category a little more. I quite like working from home. I want to have the option to go see my friends for lunch or dinner, like that stuff I really miss. But the actual functioning, running the nonprofit, I think we'll continue with working from home for anyone who wants to, because everybody's been so productive. And and I don't know that having everybody come to the office was really as important as it seemed in the past. And so that part. And then I think about for school, I like the idea of middle schoolers being able to study from home if they can. Middle school is like the brutal years for kids. And my one-person research project with my granddaughter who's in 6th grade, she just got her first straight A report card as a result of distance learning. She loves to study. She loves to learn. She is an engaged student. But the end of 5th grade was so difficult for her because the kids, that's the year where, Daniel, you're watching them go from children to little adults, and your young adults, and that transition can be really brutal for them. So I think I would like to see the future a hybrid for both learning, that students could come to school on the days that they need to be there, but prove that you're doing the work, and the school should still be paid for the student who doesn't come and sit in the desk that day, as long as they're keeping up with their studies. And another one-person research, when my son was in high school, his very dear friend was in a terrible car accident, and my son asked if he could, I was dropping him off at school and picking him up, taking him to the hospital, and then picking him up to come home and go to sleep. He asked if he could do a distance learning program that was 20 some years ago, so that he could help his friend in the hospital. So, there was a part of me that wanted to encourage that part of my son that cared that much about his friend, that he was willing to do that extra work. And we made a deal that as long as you could keep up, and 9 till noon every day is going to have to be school work at home, and then you can spend the rest of the time. And he finished 11th and 12th grade in the balance of his 11th grade year. And I think the accident happened in the late fall. So if a student can do it, some of what we're doing in school is keeping the kids who would normally go forward with the group, right? So I'd like to see more individualized ability for kids to learn at their own pace. And if they can do their schoolwork in a 3-hour period and then work on other interests in the afternoon, then I think it could be quite wonderful.
I absolutely think it could, and especially in this time, we've known, and especially we've seen a lot of great inventors, computer programmers, some amazing people that have gone on and said they didn't learn well in middle school, high school, right? They did a lot on their own on separate time, and it'd be great to do a lot of that project-based and independent learning to go along with their schoolwork. It would really be huge, and yes, it takes a lot of one-on-one time and individual planning, but could really help students.
Well, I think we are coming to the end of our half hour. I've really enjoyed the conversation, Daniel. I hope I'm going to have to go back and check and see if you really are the student that I remember sitting out there in the classroom. One of the nice things about Antioch was that the classes are all, I think 18 is the largest class you're ever going to be in at that university. So it was easier, but I do think you were a quieter student in those days. So I want to say
probably, but thank you so much for having me. It was a real pleasure.
Very nice. And thank you, Marcella, for being with us again. And thank you to everyone who's watching for taking part. And have a great rest of your week.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.